for football right now, but I've got good news for you. You got 80 days till South Carolina and Texas A&M kickoff. That Thursday night, the last Thursday of August, 80 days to SEC football. We got Ole Miss and Boise State. We got that Texas A&M South Carolina game. And the one I'm looking forward to, I'm going to move mountains to be able to see Vanderbilt and Temple play. Chad knows that. So we bring on Chad Neipling of SEC Sports Insider. This is a show that we launched 9 weeks ago, and we love to bring you on board. And for the SEC in 60, again, it's our show that we talk nothing but SEC football for at least 60 minutes every week at 1 o'clock Eastern Time and noon Central on Mondays. Hey, Chad, how are you?
Good, man. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great. And so we got some good stuff to talk about. I know that we both can't wait to see actual guys on the field popping pads, but until then, we're breaking down schedules, we're breaking down recruiting, we're talking top 5 running backs in the SEC this week. So we hope that Stephen M. Smith of Alabama, Touchdown Alabama, will join us very soon. So let's talk a little recruiting. This is probably something that maybe we should touch on a little bit every week. I was just kind of going through recruiting rankings and looking at it for 2015, Chad, and I know it doesn't mean a whole lot in regards to the rankings, basically nothing at this point, but I see these early commits coming in every day on Twitter, just flooding in. So I know that the latest one for Alabama, the latest big recruit, is they got this T.D. Moten, defensive tackle, coming out of Louisiana. He's number 23 ranked in the country. Just if there's anything that's hit home with you in your monitoring of what's happened in this early signing period, or that the commits that have come in regards to verbal commits, definitely at this point. But Alabama, man, they have 18 of these kids at this point. They have just jumped the gun on 2015.
You agree? I agree. It looks like Saban's on his way to solidifying another, phenomenal class in 2015. What's really kind of striking out of all that, Mark, is that out of those 18 commits, 13 of them were 4-stars. So they've got a 5-star, of course. But, the big kid out of there, I think, is the 5-star Mika Fitzgerald. He's the quarterback out of New Jersey. He committed back in April. You got Desharius Flowers out of Mobile as a running back. He's the 4th best overall. I think he committed back on April 15th. And then the one I really look forward to seeing is Hale. I think it's Hentges, Hentges. I'm really not. I don't want to butcher the kid's name, but try it yourself.
I'm not going to.
He's a tight end out of Missouri, 3rd best. He was one of the recent commits that they had on May 25th. He had guys like Arkansas, Auburn, Florida State that were after him. Him teaming up with Howard at 6'6", 230 pounds, I think is going to be phenomenal. Phenomenal to watch in the Kiffin's system. The other thing that intrigues me too, Mark, if you've looked at it, 6 of the teams that are in the top 10 right now for 2015 are SEC teams. You go Auburn at 4. And then right down the line, 5, 6, 7, and 8, it's A&M, Mississippi State, LSU, South Carolina. And, those 2 of those teams right now are both boasting 5-stars, and that's A&M and LSU. And, LSU right now, don't overlook them. They got a kid, Kevin Tolliver, 6'2", 185. Remember we talked before in a previous episode about how they grow cornerbacks down there like trees. He's going to be a big get for them. They've also got another guy, Tamea, that's 6'5", 340, a tackle that was the other 5-star they've got. Tolliver ended up choosing LSU, I think, over Auburn, Ohio State, UCLA, and Virginia Tech. And Tamea chose it came down between LSU and Texas, but he had offers from Baylor, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State. So I think that's pretty good. But the thing I really liked when I was going back and kind of looking at stats and looking at these breakdowns was A&M right now. Out of the guys that are commits, 11 of their 13 are out of the state of Texas. So I mean that really tells you that A&M is starting to own the state of Texas.
I know that's an interesting point you just brought up, because I follow some Texas guys on Twitter that really know their stuff when we're talking about Texas high school football and talking about the Texas Longhorns. Mm-hmm. That state has undergone a complete transformation when it comes to recruiting base, Texas versus Texas A&M. And Texas 5 years ago, not even a long time ago, dominated that state. Texas A&M was getting the 3-star guys, and that is completely flipped, and Texas is losing the battle with Texas A&M. It seems like just about every guy that comes down to a 2 or 3 school list, and Texas is right in the mix. Texas A&M is stealing those guys, and again, this is an early signing period. This is an early committal of the verbal commits, and we know what happens with a lot of these. But still, at the same time, this is pretty telling right there when we talk about the Texas A&M versus Texas battle in that state. The one thing I will say about Mississippi State is I think they're the one deceiving ranking among the SEC schools here with the 13 3-stars. I think it's just the bulk of the commits that they have right now in the composite 24/7 rankings. So it looks like you're looking at the same list that I am. Mississippi State's got 3 4-stars, which for this program at this juncture of the signing situation, that's pretty good for them. The thing that jumps on the board for me as well is Tennessee. They're coming off 2 really strong classes. They're on the fringe of the top 10 as things stand right now. Again, their proportion of 3-stars could be a little bit of a concern because we know how competitive things are in this conference, that I'm going to take a shot here that obviously the 5-stars are a rare breed. It's that 4-star column that you see a lot of superstars and impact players in the SEC come out of that 4-star group. That's pretty sizable. So you see Alabama with 13, Auburn with 9, you see A&M with 7, South Carolina with 6 out of that 4-star column. The 3-stars, certainly a lot of very strong, solid SEC players coming out of that 3-star column in previous seasons, but Mississippi State a little bit strong on that 3-star column as it stands right now, so I would expect that number 6 ranking to drop considerably for them. LSU just wrapped up a kid, got a commit from Darius Weiss, who's a running back out of Baton Rouge, 15th rated running back, and Florida as well, I think, is to keep an eye on there with Will Muschamp scratching and clawing for his job with 6 3-star recruits.
Roper has made a big difference in their recruiting in Florida, big time. If you look at some of the guys in this past class that came in the 14 class, they snagged a couple wide receivers and some guys that have potential playmakers. And then you look at this class, I think his impact, that's what we're trying to get at, is that Roper's impact is being felt right away, I think, compared to previous classes under Muschamp, in my opinion. I think, watch out. I think Florida, once Roper kind of gets things rolling there, if Muschamp survives this season, they can't lose to Georgia, that's for sure. But, if they survive this season, Roper could be the guy that, kind of helps get things back together down there in Florida. Real quick, I will say this about Mississippi State and the 3-stars. A lot of times when you see teams going after 3-stars, sometimes it's because that's what the school is, that's what they can get. You kind of look at it and be like, all right, well, that's kind of what they're built on. In some situations, some schools build up depth off of those 3-stars. But then you've got schools like Alabama, Auburn, A&M, and LSU. Their 3-stars are legitimate depth builders. Their 4-stars are guys that are also on depth as well. But, most of them, their 4-stars are their depth. So it's like a step up. But I will say this. 5-stars in national championships or how well your team does, it does make a difference. There's a relative. It's relative. The 5-stars and how well and how good a team does in the SEC. Those things are relative. How many 4-stars you get dictates how good you're going to be on the field. I mean, it's relative. What you bring in will reflect on the field, and I think we're starting to see that more and more in the SEC. And to see these early commits like we are coming in from all over the nation, man, I mean, that's pretty powerful for the SEC, in my opinion, to be racking up these type of numbers early on.
Yeah, to steal a cliche from another show, numbers never lie. If you look at the bulk of the commits, they tell the story. I know you can specifically look at that 5-star was a bust and that 2-star became a star. Yeah, you can point out specifics, but at the same time, if you look at the bulk and you're looking at 22 to 25 kids typically per class, something in that range, and and add up the years, you're talking close to 100 commits over the course and signees over the course of a 4-year span, and the numbers don't lie. If you looked at the way the Big Ten and the Big 12 competed with the SEC on the field and in the recruiting numbers 10 or 12 years ago, pretty even.
Yeah.
The SEC is just shot out of sight here in the last 7 or 8 years, and specifically, man, doubling up the top recruits on the other major powers in the last couple years, and we've seen it on the field. So it goes hand in hand, and I love to see that 4-star column again as being where the real major players typically come from. The 5 stars are so rare. There's going to be like 15 or 18 in the country, something like that, depending on your service. A couple things I'd like to mention before we move on, Chad. One thing is that Auburn, in trying to capitalize on the kick 6, I don't know if you've seen this. A couple things they've got going here is they got some kind of big board. I haven't seen it. I need to look this up and actually see it, but they got some kind of board where they've got some kind of enactment or picture of the kick 6 for Chris Davis against Alabama, and you can stick your face. If you're a recruit and they take your picture, you stick your face. You can be the returnee, you can be blocking for them, whatever the case might be. And then the other thing is that they've got it actually in Jordan-Hare Stadium. I don't know if you've seen this. They got it marked, the path of Chris Davis down the field, and they got it all lined up to say, hey, this is where history was made. You come to Auburn, we'll make some history.
Yeah, I think I love the marking on the field with the orange paint, to track his steps as he comes out. I just thought that was really neat. And I mean, if you're Auburn, you should be proud of that. You should be proud of the fact that happened on your field and that you made history. I mean, to me, one of the intros I use for my show I do on ESPN Radio is the radio call whenever he's calling him running it back. I mean, that's one of the best sports calls in my mind in a long, long time. I mean, outside of what Harry Carey for the Cubs, you listen to him, but I mean, to listen to the radio announcer just start screaming, Auburn's gonna win the game. I mean, it's just that is one of the best experiences. And if you're a real true football fan, I don't care. I know in the South we've got some deep-seated rivalries, but if you listen to that, that's a pretty powerful broadcast there. But I liked it. I saw that. I thought that was pretty neat. And it's good on Auburn. Good on Auburn. They should take advantage of that.
The only thing that could possibly have made that play any bigger in the aftermath, obviously, is if Auburn would have completed the deal and won the national championship. But otherwise, you're talking about the perfect storm. You're talking about arguably the biggest rivalry in college football. You're talking about them playing for the SEC championship game berth. You're talking about the path to the national championship. The loser gets knocked out. The winner continues on the path. And then you talk about the craziest play. You never see a kick off the field goal. I think we've seen it a couple times in the NFL. I don't remember a college football game having that play, and then definitely not to end the game. So it was just the perfect storm of just the craziest finish involving the most important circumstances at the same time. Just historic stuff.
Yeah.
The last thing, Chad, I just wanted to mention about the recruiting. You got something for us on Auburn?
Oh, no. I was just going to go ahead and say, yeah, I agree with you on that. Yeah, let's go on.
Before we move on, just connected to the SEC here, and looking at this 24/7 composite rankings, you got Penn State at 2 or 3 in the country. Interesting, James Franklin going to Penn State. 10 4-star commits at this point. Penn State traditionally.
Thank Vanderbilt for that. You can thank Vanderbilt because he stole a lot of their recruits.
Yeah, he did steal a lot of their recruits, and they were good recruits, and that shows you how far Vandy's come to have a good bulk of those 10 4-stars that supposedly are going to Penn State. They probably committed to 18 different schools at this point and will in the future, but we'll see how it plays out. I wouldn't expect Penn State to maintain that top 5 ranking, but I think with James Franklin in place and the bowl bans and the sanctions have kind of passed them by, they've kind of weathered the storm. Penn State could be a factor in the national scene once again. So, Chad, man, we gotta look forward to 2014 because, again, we're both itching to see some football. So let's talk positional rankings here. Let's look at the running back position, because this position in the SEC is loaded. And of course, we're inviting people to jump on board and give us your comments and your top 5 lists as well. And no, we knocked out a video, a couple different videos, and you've looked at this on SEC Sports Insider and knocked out some material there. But I just wanted to get your feel for your top 5 running backs, and then I'll jump in here and let you know what I'm thinking in regards to who are the people that we really want to focus on at the running back position this year.
Yeah, let's. How do you want to go at this, Mark? Do you want to go from top to bottom or bottom to top?
Hey, you do whatever you want, Chad. This is all you right now.
All right. Well, I'm gonna jump in. I'm gonna go from 5 to 1. So 5 being my lowest ranking here. In the SEC, traditionally, the running back position is the position that is probably one of the most notorious, probably one of the most popular positions. Probably, if you're a starting running back at an SEC school, regardless if it's Vanderbilt, wherever it may be, somebody's going to know your name. It's just, that's a position that is prided upon in the SEC. The running game is something that we very much pride our game on in the SEC, that and the defense. So with that said, the guys that I'm looking at, and when I compiled my top 5 running back list that I produced on SEC Sports Insider, I looked at guys that were returning, and I looked at their numbers, and I also looked at, the variable in the mix of that was the potential for this next season, kind of looking at their schedules that they had coming in for 2014. My 4 and 5 guys are actually on the same team. They come out of Arkansas. Jonathan Williams and Alex Collins at 4 and 5. Jay Will is going to be a sophomore. I think he's going to be a junior. He was a sophomore this last year. He's going to be a junior. And Alex Collins is going to be a sophomore. Collins came out and broke records as a freshman. He did. And then you had Jay Will, who managed to put up 900 yards and 4 touchdowns. But a lot of people are speculating that Collins in his second year is going to be an absolute monster on the ground. I went to the spring game and actually got to get my eyes on the field and watch these guys up close. And if you guys go and check out SECSportsInsider.com later this week, I'll have the galleries up from all the spring games that we attended. I will be honest with you, Alex Collins did not impress me at the spring game. Now, spring, you could say it's vanilla versus vanilla, it's 1s, 2s, whatever it may be. But that said, the guy who showed up was Murphy. Murphy, as of right now, if you look at him, he's probably going to be 3rd on the depth chart. He got some playing time against Mississippi State last season in Little Rock. And, because Alex Collins and Jonathan Williams both were, they were basically penalized for some infractions they had off the field. Now, I will tell you this, the kid was phenomenal to me. Murphy looked like the real deal. Fast, low shoulder pads. I mean, I really think they may have a 3-headed monster in Arkansas this next year with Murphy, Collins, and Williams back there. Williams still looks massive. Mark, I'm not kidding you. The kid's thighs are huge. They look like tree trunks. And I mean, he's got a fire in his stomach. He's one of those guys who's real fiery. Collins had looked to me like he had put on some weight, and I don't mean necessarily in a good way. He still looked. He had a quick first step. He still was slashing and cutting, but as far as he looked to me like he was kind of winded after a couple plays of getting runs. And when he did get some runs, the defense was on him pretty quick. The thing about Collins, and the one negative thing about him, the kid's an awesome, phenomenal running back and has a ton of potential. But the thing that a lot of Arkansas fans look at when they talk about Alex Collins is how he doesn't compare to a Darren McFadden, who also was able to make these cuts, put his head down, make some hits. But Darren McFadden had that 5th year that whenever he broke out wide, nobody was catching. Alex Collins had a nice break for a run up the middle and got tripped up by one of the secondary players. So you're not going to see him break a ton of runs. But the Murphy kid, he's got a whole other gear, Mark. I think they're going to have some plays worked out for him. Next guy on my list at number 3 is T.J. Yeldon. And I recently did an article on Yeldon talking about him potentially being a Heisman guy. Right now, I think he's got, I want to say it's 18-1 odds in winning the Heisman. Of course, everybody thinks Winston's going to be the guy, at 5-1 odds coming back this next year. But I think Yeldon, He quietly, I like to call him the quiet assassin because he comes in, he does his work, goes back out. He's not a flashy guy. The one time he was flashy was when he did the throat slit last season, and of course Saban got on to him about that, and he had to issue an apology. But outside of that, he's not a real flash. I mean, he does his work and goes back, and I got a chance to see him last season, and he's a true workhorse. The guy puts up a lot of yardage. And if it wasn't for the fact that he had fumbling problems, he'd probably be my number one guy, or at least number two. Because the top three guys on this list are really it's kind of tit for tat on who's gonna take this, because these next three guys legitimately, Mark, in my opinion, could be Heisman front runners. But Yeldon still managed to put up 2,343 yards over the last 2 years. The bulk of that coming last year by 200 yards more. He's had 26 touchdowns over the course of the last couple of years. He's most likely, like I said, he's going to be on a lot of early Heisman lists. But the guy that I think that really is going to be a Heisman front runner is probably going to be Gurley. But running into number two is going to be Mike Davis out of South Carolina. Davis, if it wasn't for it being his sophomore season, he probably could have went in the draft last year. Him coming back this year, most likely he'll leave. He rushed for 1,183 yards, 11 touchdowns, in his first season as a starter. Physically, he's what you would look at for a pro-style running back. He'll take it between the A-gap. He's not afraid of being physical. He'll take it right between the tackles. He'll bounce it on the outside. He's got a lot of speed. He's fast. From what I heard from our insider, Reese Funderburk, who covers South Carolina for us, he was there for the spring game for me. Reese had reported to me that, Davis looked slimmer. As in, he looked a little more cut, like he had put on more muscle, but he was cut. He actually looked quicker, believe it or not. So coming back into this next season with Thompson being kind of the leader, as it were, this time with South Carolina, and South Carolina looking to define itself in the passing game, I think a guy like Davis is going to get a lot of work. And potentially, if the season works out correctly for South Carolina and they get past Georgia the first couple weeks, Davis could be looking at having his name called in New York as well. The number one guy overall, Todd Gurley, without a doubt. If you want to look at a guy who is probably the most pro-ready out of this list, it's probably Todd Gurley. Not only can he run it, he can catch it. If not for his injuries last season, he probably could have been a front runner at some point last season. He's a phenomenal talent. He spent 3 to 5 games last season dealing with injuries. So they had a lot of freshmen. J.J. Dream was a guy that got some runs for him last year. At 2,374 yards and 27 touchdowns in 2 seasons, that's hard to duplicate. Very physical runner. With Mason being the guy who's going to ultimately be the starting quarterback, to have a guy like Gurley behind him, that's only going to make his game better. Because I really think that Georgia may have some issues in their passing game as far as being able to not downfield, but in some of the short intermediate passes from what we saw in the spring game, they may have some struggling there. But I think as far as their long ball is concerned, they're going to do great. But you got a guy like Gurley back there. Come on, Mark. You're going to hand that guy the ball as much as possible.
Yeah, he is the guy. I don't think there's any question about that. If you look at any top 5, top 10 list around the SEC or around the country, Todd Gurley's just in a different level, different class, and we're talking about quality backs, not just these 5, but beyond that in the SEC, even with some of the losses at the NFL. All right, so that's the top 5 for you, huh?
Yeah.
I got one difference here, and then maybe we'll touch upon a couple guys that could vie for the top 5 by the end of the season. I'm going to go with a wild card here at number 5. Now, necessarily, do I think this person's going to have the numbers to be placed in the top 5? So you can look at these top lists, these top 10 or top 5 lists 2 different ways. Are we just looking at who's going to get the opportunity and who has the offensive line and maybe the passing game to open things up to produce the numbers that would rank as a top 5 player? Or do I just think this guy's a top 5 player? Maybe he's got a bad offensive line, maybe they got no passing game, but I just think he's the 3rd best running back in the SEC. And that's how I approached it. Not necessarily that they're going to produce the 5 best numbers, but these are the 5 best backs in my opinion. So I'm going to start with the sophomore Derrick Henry out of Alabama. Wow. Watching the Sugar Bowl last year, he just impressed me so much. And he had gotten a few looks before that, but he only had about 35 carries last season. 10 or 11 of those came in the Sugar Bowl, and the Sooners couldn't tackle him, and it was their night. But when it came to Derrick Henry, he just lived up to the billing on that particular night. And throughout the season, when he got his chances, 10.6 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns. Again, he made all the big plays on the ground for Alabama, and it was interesting to see T.J. Yeldon on the sideline in key situations when Alabama was trying to mount a comeback, when Yeldon has always been the guy that got the football over these couple years, ever since Eddie Lacy moved on to the NFL, that Yeldon's been the guy in the clutch. When it's been a tough spot and they needed to put together a drive, it's been Yeldon until that Sugar Bowl game. And Henry's amazing talent, the burst and the size. You talk about thighs and hips on a player. Man, he is a monster. And of course, he was just a freshman, and the ceiling's really high on this guy. So again, he may not get the touches to warrant a top 5 ranking against some of these other guys that are the number 1 guy for their team. But I think just in terms of sheer talent and ability, Derrick Henry's really going to push T.J. Yeldon. Number 4, man, I love your take on the Arkansas situation, because if you just look at a stat sheet, you can't tell the difference between Alex Collins and Jonathan Williams. Their production was pretty much the same. Got the football about the same amount of time. Collins barely broke 1,000 yards. Williams was right there at 900 yards. Actually had a better yards per carry average. They both scored 4 touchdowns. If you look against the quality opponents, the same thing. They pretty much shared carries. I'm going on reputation here. I'm going to go with Alex Collins with a slight edge. Number 1, because that's coming off his freshman season. For Williams, it was his sophomore season. So considering Collins has that much more of a ceiling in regards to improvement from his freshman to a sophomore season, I'm going to give the nod to Alex Collins and keep Jonathan Williams on the second tier on the honorable mention. But the thing that impressed me about both of these kids was that Arkansas had the worst passing game in the conference. The box was loaded. The box was loaded, number 1. Number 2, they could have racked up a lot more yardage if they would have been in competitive games in the second half, but they started to have to chuck the ball down the field in the fourth quarter, or these guys could have had just ridiculous monster years. And Alex Collins, against some of the better defenses on their schedule, South Carolina, Florida. No, Florida only won 4 games, but I'm talking about one of the top front 7s in the conference. Alex Collins, 5 yards a carry against everybody. Even with a loaded box, even with no passing threat, he still churned out yardage. And you mentioned the breakaway speed not being there in the Darren McFadden mode. He does have the burst through the hole and to get to the second level. But, yeah, he's not going to break off too many 75-yarders for you. But that speed that you need from 0 to 10 to get you to that second level, he's got that. And so does Jonathan Williams. And so, wow. Arkansas needs talent at other positions. They've got plenty at running back. They could use some of that maybe in the defensive secondary or at linebacker, but they've got it at running back. At number 3, I'm going to go with Mike Davis of South Carolina. This guy turned out to be a much better back than I gave him credit for going into 2013. You mentioned the stats at 5.8 per carry, 11 touchdowns. This guy's a dual threat in regards to he can give you the outlet in the flat and catches the ball really well. You mentioned what Pierce gave you from or Reese gave you at the scouting from the spring game. I watched the South Carolina spring game on TV. Mike Davis on the first play of the game made a beautiful spin move in the hole and just completely left 2 linebackers on their knees. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, he looks to be a little bit quicker, and he followed that up with a couple other impressive runs in the open field where he made guys miss. So he may have added a little wrinkle to his game. And the impressive thing, Missouri, until they hit Auburn in the SEC championship game, didn't let anybody run on them. You can check out the stats throughout the season. Missouri had a great rush defense, and they shut down Mike Davis as well. So what did he do? He caught 11 passes for 100 yards in that game. And, of course, South Carolina came back and 17 points behind Connor Shaw in that one late in the game to win that one. So I like Mike Davis as a junior coming in here at number 3. All right, at number 2, I'm going to go with T.J. Yeldon, Alabama. There seems to be an epidemic at Alabama where they're not happy with the number 1 guy at running back. They've gotten into this mode where it's who's the next guy? We like the next guy. You know, it started with Mark Ingram, and Trent Richardson was starting to get carries and show flashes, and Bama fans were like, we want to see Richardson. And then Richardson to Eddie Lacy, and Lacy to Yeldon, and now we see the same thing with Derrick Henry. And Kenyon Drake seems to be the forgotten man, and he was getting some valuable playing time throughout most of the season, and he just stood with his helmet in his hand during the Sugar Bowl, didn't touch the football. But Kenyon Drake was had an exceptional season, 700 yards, 8 touchdowns, 7.5 per carry. But T.J. Yeldon, man, I think this guy's underappreciated. Fumble issues. He had a key one against Mississippi State that kept that game close. He had some other issues. Of course, the Texas A&M game, he spotted them a lead with an early fumble. So that has been an issue in his game. You also hit on something, Chad, in regards to his style of play. It doesn't really, because he's just not the mauler that just crushes people, and he's also not the pure speed guy. He's kind of a combination. He doesn't wow you. But I think where I first became extremely impressed with this guy in a big situation was against Georgia in the second half of the SEC championship game as a freshman when that Alabama offensive line took over the game. And it was Lacy, but it was also Yeldon ran for 100 yards plus in that game, had a huge game. They barely held off Georgia. He's a freshman in the SEC title game with everything on the line, and they're giving him the rock in the second half. It was impressive. The stats are very consistent. You mentioned a couple hundred more yards this season than as a freshman, over 6 yards a carry both seasons, 12 and 14 touchdowns. And again, Saban seems to give it to everybody, but when it turns out to be a big spot like it was against LSU in that game in Tuscaloosa, it was a 17-17 game early in the fourth quarter. T.J. Yeldon was getting the football time and time again, so Saban still trusts him coming into his junior season. And then number 1, what more can we say about Todd Gurley, except I want to see him healthy for 14 games, maybe in an SEC championship game as well. Would love to see that because he just wasn't the same back after he hurt the ankle. Credit the kid for coming back as a sophomore and playing on that ankle and coming back much earlier than people anticipated him coming back. Keith Marshall ran for like 1,000 yards and 10 or 12, 13 touchdowns as a freshman, and he's not good enough to stay in that backfield and get much attention, and now he's got some injury issues as well. But Todd Gurley's that good that a Keith Marshall and any other oncomers, J.J. Green, other guys, cannot get on the field because he's just a beast. Even with a bad ankle, even when he was running in that Outback Bowl and you could tell that he was like 60% of himself, he still ran for 100 yards, close to it, almost 1,000 yards on a bad ankle and missing like 5 games. Wow, he's just a monster. And man, he's got soft hands, Chad. 37 receptions and 6 touchdowns last year. That's amazing. So I just want to see what the kid can do with a full season and being the number 1 guy. We saw most of it 2 years ago when they went to the SEC title game, 17 touchdowns, even sharing the backfield with Keith Marshall. So this is going to be fun to watch, and I just think this is a loaded running back core for the SEC this season. Just wanted to mention Leonard Fournette. Who knows if we're going to see him much this season for LSU, but if there's going to be a breakout running back from the freshman ranks, it's probably going to be him. I talked about this last week when we talked Vandy football, but Jerron Seymour probably scored the most quiet 14 touchdowns ever in this conference. Kelvin Taylor out of Florida, what impresses me, and this isn't watching Florida play because once they dropped off the map, kind of like Arkansas, I was just watching the highlights and watching them in some of the bigger games earlier against Miami before, again, Florida dropped off the map. But no passing threat. Boxes are loaded against them, against some of the better defenses in the conference, and he's still slugging it out for 4.5 to 5 yards a carry against really good defenses as a freshman. So look out for Kelvin Taylor. We mentioned Drake. Cameron Artis-Payne is the #1 guy in Auburn, but he's going to have a tough time holding on to his job. He's got some competition there. And then kind of a wild card here I'll throw out at you because I know that got your eye on Mississippi State is Josh Robinson, who ran it for 6 yards per carry last season, almost 500 yards as well.
Yeah, I like Josh. Man, Josh is a bowling ball. I had an opportunity to meet him when I was down there at their spring game, and you know, he's legit, solid kid, short. You know, he's very talented. He's a guy that's going to be the #2 running back for sure. You know, they've got some things there going on at Mississippi State as far as the running game is concerned, especially with Dak being there this year as your dual threat. And Dak's not a small guy himself, so but with a guy like Josh that can get low and get between the tackles, you're going to have somebody that can get you the yards that you need. A guy, I mentioned him a second ago, but Corliss Marshall that moved from the secondary into running back for Arkansas. Give him an eye this year. That guy is legitimately probably the most explosive, fastest guy in that backfield out of the guys we mentioned already for Arkansas.
And that's going to be a tough decision for Arkansas to make, to move him from defensive backfield where they're really hurting to get another playmaker on offense, and a guy that's a much different player, that, like you say, than Williams or Collins, where he gives them that guy on the edge that, from what I hear, and I can't wait to see this kid play, is kind of a Percy Harvin in the making. Could be that kind of player.
Yeah, extremely explosive on the outside. You get him out there in that spot, he's going to be something else. Yeah, man, I'm excited about this year. I think there's a lot of guys that are up and coming in the running back ranks that we're going to be learning their names. I really like the Seymour kid out of Vanderbilt. Like you said, he went along being one of the quiet guys, and I like that. I like a guy who puts up numbers and puts up touchdowns like that, and we're not beating down the door to find out who he is. But I bet you this year he's going to get his name heard quite a bit, because with Mason coming in there, you're going to see a little bit more of a traditional power set that they're going to run. And I think you'll probably see him being more of a focal point in that offense more this year. I think that the team that really has the most, I guess talking about three-headed monsters, would be Alabama with Drake and Henry and Yeldon back there. The only thing that's going to keep Yeldon from getting to that next level of being like a Heisman contender is the fact that he's going to be sharing the handles with Henry and Drake. You know, the last guy that was a running back to win the Heisman was in 2008, and that was Ingram. It was Ingram.
09?
It was Richardson. I think it was in 2008.
It was Ingram.
Yeah, it was Ingram. Yeah, that's right. Because Richardson.
In 09. Yep.
So, he was the last one to win as a running back, and for Yeldon to do that, Yeldon's going to have to get quite a few more carries this season in order for him to be able to get that ranking as well. But with a guy like Henry and Drake behind you, I mean, you've got options, massive options. And 6'3", 240-pound running back sitting behind you as a sophomore that can literally just bulldoze linemen. That's a lot. That says a lot about Alabama's ability to recruit top players as well.
All right, Chad. Let's look at Mizzou here. We're trying to take a team a week, look at the schedule, break down the personnel, who's coming back, who was lost, and we've looked at Kentucky and Vanderbilt, and if we break this down throughout the rest of the weeks leading to the SEC season, we're going to about time this thing out. So we look at the Tigers this week, who, outside of Auburn, this was the most remarkable turnaround in college football last year, from 2 wins in the SEC, 2 fairly unimpressive wins 2 years ago, and let's see, 2-6, 4-8 overall, and then bam, they're run into the SEC title game, win the Cotton Bowl, finish in the top 5 or 6, 7 in the country. Gary Pinkel did an amazing job with his team, considering it looked like, wow, SEC shock really hit this program. How are they going to recover? Maybe this was a bad move. Maybe the Big 12 was their spot to win 7, 8, 9 games a year. Now they're going to hit the SEC and get completely stampeded and lost. But that wasn't the case last season. So your thoughts about Mizzou coming in? We'll look at the schedule as well.
Okay. Really, for me, The biggest question, I think we talked about this before the show, is really finding out who their playmakers are going to be on offense this season, and finding out quick and early. And they've got the schedule that really kind of gives them that opportunity in the first few games. Toledo and University of Central Florida, they've got some weaker games up front so that they can find out who's going to be their guys as far as playmakers are concerned. The one guy that you've got coming back that's definitely going to be a leader is Mock. We know he played 9 games last season, had 51.1% completion percentage, 5 sacks that he had last year, and a lot of that is due because he's a scrambling type of guy, so he got himself in some situations where he got sacked. He had 2 interceptions, 11 TDs, 3 games that were 200 yards plus last season that he came in and played on. With a win over Florida and Kentucky, of course, neither one of those really looking back at last season is something to brag about. But he had a 200-plus yard game against South Carolina and a loss there. The receiving core, again, is my major question. You've got guys like Levi Copeland coming back, Jimmy Hunt, Bud Sasser, and Darius White. All those guys together probably combined for about 50-plus receptions from last season, closer to 60. And that said, still, even with the yardage that they had, you're still looking at probably less than 700, 600 yards, somewhere in that range, less of yardage that was gained by all 4 of those guys. Out of those 4, 3 of them got TDs last season. So you're looking at these guys saying, okay, who's going to step up for them this next season? And you look at Jimmy Hunt and Bud Sasser, they stick out the most. Those guys are going to be your senior guys that are coming in. Hunt had 22 receptions, 253 yards. Sasser had 26 receptions, 361 yards. And then you look at some of their incoming guys they've got from the 2014 recruiting class that ranked 39th overall and 13th in the SEC, which really kind of wasn't that great as far as recruiting is concerned. But you look at a guy like Nate Brown, who's a 4-star at 6'3", 210, who should probably come in and compete right away. And then you've got 2 other guys that are 3-stars, Lawrence Lee and Deshaun Blair. Blair being the guy that has the bigger frame of the 2, being at 6'4", 190, put a little weight on him, and you're looking at another, Washington or DGB perhaps. And both of those guys are going to get a shot as well at coming on and getting some game time early. We know that Hansborough, and I think you had mentioned Murphy as their running back situation was going to be able to come in and definitely get some yardage for them. Hansborough is probably going to be the guy to take the lead. He had 4 TDs and 114 carries last year, 685 yards. We know that they've got some issues on defense after losing games and, losing a couple of their guys on the defensive line that went into the draft this year. So we've got some things that, some issues there on defense they're going to have to address pretty quickly. The one thing that stands out to me the most, and we know Missouri likes to air it out, people like to air it out on offense, their tight end situation. They really don't have anybody coming in statistically in the tight end except for Sean Colkin, and he's returning with 1 reception from last year. So that's an area I'm curious to see how they address that on offense. Is that going to be a part of their play much this year? Are they going to, what are they going to look for? Mock's going to have somebody to ditch that ball to if one of these receivers don't work out well. So look for a tight end position. Look for somebody to step up there pretty early on. And, again, defense is something I don't think we're going to see the defense we saw last year with the guys that we saw in that caliber of defense. Again, they're going to have issues early on, but they've got the schedule early on, Mark, I think, to address some of these problems.
I think they're probably about an 8-4 football team, glancing at the schedule. I've got the same concerns that you do. Unfortunately for Matty Mock, it's bad timing on his part because he really impressed me as a redshirt freshman quarterback. He came into a difficult situation in Athens, Georgia. James Franklin hobbled, going to the sideline, tight football game, made a couple throws that they needed. They pulled out that game that really spurred them on toward that SEC Eastern Division championship run. And like you say, 51% completion percentage, that's got to improve. You got to be much more efficient in the passing game. But I love the 11-2 touchdown to pick ratio. He played in the big game, so he's been on the big stage. So even though he's technically taking over as the starter, he's been on the big stage against some big teams. South Carolina, he threw a touchdown in the Cotton Bowl. They got him some work in the Cotton Bowl that I thought that was important to get Franklin off the field and get Matty Mock some throws in that kind of atmosphere as well. So I think they're rock solid at quarterback. This kid has got a cannon. He can make all the throws, and we've seen him play under the spotlight. So he's set. Yeah, to lose DGB, Lucas, and Washington, like you pointed out, all three of those guys around 60 receptions, DGB 12 touchdown receptions. Man, if he could have come back, that would have been that one guy, that security blanket that, man, if I get in trouble, I can hang it up for my big 6'6" guy that's just a freak of an athlete. He doesn't have that. He's got marginal receivers, guys that are decent second and third guys, possibly in Sasser and Hunt. I just think they have all sorts of issues making plays on the outside. That's going to be difficult. Murphy and Hansbrough have nice numbers, as you pointed out. If you look at the game logs, they didn't get the carries against the better teams. A lot of that was made against some of the out-of-conference opponents that Missouri had. Josie got the carries against the big teams, although Murphy, probably more so than Hansbrough, despite having less yardage overall, got the carries against Ole Miss and South Carolina and scored the 9 touchdowns. So Murphy actually probably more productive against the better teams last season. I'm understanding that their defensive line, despite the losses, they're very confident who they've got stepping in. Some redshirt freshmen at the defensive end position that they think are going to be. You outlined the depth up front that they have. So despite losing Sam and Ely, this is supposed to continue to be a strength of this football team. I think the secondary is going to be hurt. So at wide receiver and secondary, I think those are the big issues. They got Braylon Webb with 30 starts back at safety. Ian Simon started 9 games at safety, so they're set there, but the cornerbacks are extremely young. Of course, they lose Gaines, who picked off 5 passes, first-team All-SEC guy. So I'm looking at this schedule, and I think they shoot out of the gate probably with 4 wins. The Central Florida game, who knows what they've got coming back. Of course, they lose Bortles and their best running back, Storm Johnson. That Indiana game, they had a shootout last year. They're overall much better than the Hoosiers, but the Hoosiers are going to score points, but they can't tackle anyone. Mizzou's going to score like 50 points. That's going to be like a 51-35 game. And then, boy, they hit the grinder here. South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Vandy. So they got 4 consecutive games there where they need to probably hold serve and go 500 if they want to make a possible run at the Eastern Division Championship. 3-1 most likely is what's going to get it done there. I'm also interested, Chad, that the SEC is making a move here, that we've seen them push this LSU-Arkansas rivalry on the last Friday of the season after Thanksgiving, and I'm looking at Arkansas-Mizzou. Haven't looked into this, but this seems to be now the designated foe for Mizzou, that they're going Mizzou-Arkansas, and they put that game right after Thanksgiving on that Friday.
Yeah, very sensitive subject in the state of Arkansas. Not so much with LSU. If you actually look back into the history books, LSU and A&M have had a storied rivalry in the past. You go back quite a bit of ways, 50s, 60s. Those teams played each other quite a bit. The Arkansas-Missouri rivalry, it's more prevalent, I would say, in basketball because they've played each other so much in basketball. Football, they've only played each other a handful of times, actually less than that, only a couple of times. So a lot of the Arkansas fan base feels like they're being force-fed this rivalry with Missouri. Now, that being said, they did get the game on CBS at 2:30 Eastern, on a Friday. So they still got the Friday game. They've got that national coverage that they want. Granted, it's against Missouri. Still, beggars can't be choosers with this whole mix-up of what they've got going on. They do get LSU. I think they'll get LSU again, but it's going to end up being earlier in the season when they rotate them around with the 6-1-1 schedule. That may or may not play well. A lot of Arkansas fans were in a tizzy over this, Mark, when it happened. And I mean, I listened to radio there and a couple of other states, Alabama and South Carolina, I listened to quite a bit, and their fan base was calling in left and right. They were pretty upset about it. That said, they're going to have to move forward and accept some things, that they're being pushed at them. And, with Bielema and his staff right now, I mean, maybe this works out the best for them, not getting LSU on their schedule this year.
All right, Chad Neipling of SEC Sports Insider. Please join him there. Also on Twitter at SEC Sports Insider. We've run out of time, but please check out our podcast. So I'm going to turn this around. We'll get it out there for a podcast. So if you can't sit down and watch us for an hour on Mondays, check out the podcast. We'll release the video also coming up in the next few weeks on SEC Sports Insider. You can catch me here, Mark Rogers TV, on YouTube and also at MarkRogersTV.com. This is the SEC in 60. It's Chad Neipling and myself every Monday, 1 o'clock Eastern, noon Central, knocking it out with SEC football, nothing but SEC football for at least 60 minutes, and we welcome you to join the fun. So, Chad, appreciate the time, man. We'll get it done next week again.
All right, take care, Mark.